I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at housefarms.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn puss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
So, real quick, we got Phillip Ittner joining us on the line, phoning in, and I think we can hear him. Phil, are you there?
Yeah.
Look at that.
I don't know how's the quality. Okay.
Sounds great, and you sound terrific, and that's the least of our worries today. First of all, how you doing, my friend?
Good.
You look great.
He can't see you. That's very silly. So, and by the way, just so people know, there's a ton of Ukraine news or whatever, but I would like to drop just for our local listeners and for people at home, the AG of Texas is going to be indicted on multiple charges.
Oh my!
At this point, Ken Paxton, that dude who led the charge of the Trump, fake electors and all that kind of stuff.
Hasn't he helped pass all kinds of horrible laws?
Oh, he's a terrible person. Yes, He's not fun to be around at all. He's a very mean and nasty human being. But on top of that, he's one of those people who was curiously pro-Russia in a lot of these situations.
Weird.
Always coming to the defense, which leads us nicely into our discussion here with Phillip Ittner. Hi, Phil. Catch us up on the latest. And we will have questions from the chat, no doubt.
Yeah, I've not been looking at the chat, so if you ask me
He's
something...
going to start.
Yeah, I'm going to start
I guess the
now.
big one is the Ivan Kerr's sinking, or the hit, one of the big things.
Yeah. There's that. There's the announcement coming out, the head of the military here, Gennady Zaluzhny, indicating that the long-expected counteroffensive, although I don't know if that's the right term to be using, it's really imminent. It's a matter. It's being described by people in the Ministry of Defense as it could. The quote that I saw was, "It could start tomorrow. It could start the day after tomorrow, or it could start a week from now."
Right.
That's the kind of time frame we're looking at here. So,
does it seem like
anticipating it for a while, but
right?
I think it's kind of already started, frankly.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think maybe part of it was the forces behind enemy lines that are sort of jump starting it, coordinating perhaps their activities with the bombing campaigns that have been going on as sort of a softening attack, I suppose.
I have those every now and then.
Yeah.
It's true, he does.
There's a pill for that.
Yeah, I know, but the studio is like sealed like an airlock.
Yeah.
Anyways, so.
Well, I think the counteroffensive has started because I don't think it's going to be similar to what we saw at the last counteroffensive that the Ukrainians launched, where they had kind of pincer moves and like direct offensive spearheads and things like that. Last summer around Kherson and Kharkiv, it seems like, and it's until it actually starts full-fledged, we don't know for sure.
Right. But
all the indications we're getting is that don't think of this in terms of there being some sort of geographical, somewhere along the offensive-defensive line where there will be a thrust by Ukrainian forces, and there'll be a breakthrough, and then they go behind enemy lines and do all that kind of stuff. Where there's a push towards a military objective. It's starting to sound more and more like what the Ukrainians are planning on doing.
Right.
Is attacking along the entire front. So it's being seen more like a campaign than a single counteroffensive. They're going to try and put pressure everywhere on the Russians, or make conditions such that the Russians have to defend the entire line because they don't know where any one single attack is going to come from. And then occasionally they may, that's why I think the Belgorod, the incursion into Russia proper towards this, town called Belgorod is part of that, because it's going to make the Russians have to defend the entire line and also the border and also strategic depths of Russia itself.
And play into sort of the paranoia about how, what could be coming.
It could come from anywhere is the mentality. They want the Russian soldier to think They want the Russian soldiers to think that every one of them along the line is in jeopardy, and they want to make the Russians expend and deploy their troops so that they can defend everywhere along the map. Whereas, the Ukrainians will know where and when they're actually going to make pushes and things like that. So it's going to be a very different kind of situation than the last counteroffensive.
Right.
I think we'll have to see how it goes.
Now, I think one of the things that I have been, one of the areas we're most concerned about is Zaporizhia because of the nuclear power plant. And so people, rightly so, are concerned about, a second Chernobyl and all that kind of stuff. And back and forth over the course of the last 15 months, there's been this concern that the Russians will blow it up or rig it, or, if they retreat from it, they'll set booby traps and they don't care, and that back and forth. Apparently, there are reports, and this is hard for me to kind of track down all this, but that the Russians are engaged in what are effectively like false flag chemical weapons attacks in the occupied territories of Zaporizhia as a quote an attempt to disrupt the counteroffensive, and like they're basically it's hard to tell if it's an actual false flag, or if they're smoking too close to ammo dumps again, which, that kind of stuff, where they're, misusing their own stuff. And so it's better to, create a story out of it after the fact. Do you know, have you heard any of
no, but then if you also listen to the Russians, the Russians say, so this whole idea of a false flag gets really complicated, because the Russians will say the Ukrainians are meant to have an accusation against us because they're going to do a false flag.
Sure, right.
So the Ukrainians say,
no, it's your false flag. No, it's I'm a rubber ball, you're glue foreign policy, right? It's very strange.
So both sides are claiming that the other one is prepping for some sort of incident so that they can have an excuse to proclaim, either if you're Ukrainian, look how awful the Russians are, we need more defensive weapons, or offensive weapons, we need to win the war. Or if you're Russian, the Ukrainians are just saying that because they want to demonize us.
Right.
And they want more support from the West. So,
Gotcha.
The Zaporizhia thing is scary, but
but more of the same.
Blowing up.
You think?
Kind of more of the same, but also, kind of more of the same. And also, you have to recognize that both the Russians and the Ukrainians know that blowing up, basically, in essence, exploding a dirty bomb out of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, could be really devastating for anybody, depending on the way the wind blows, depending on how it contaminates.
And the idea that they want the ground, they ultimately want the ground, right? And
also the Ukrainians are not of the mentality of destroying their own property.
Right, exactly, and that's again. That I think is the one thing that probably keeps their baser instincts in check and makes them act in a way, as much as they are leveling cities, they're trying to not permanently make toxic the space they would take over. Like, they don't care about Chechnya per se, but the restraint they showed in Georgia to some degree, the reason they did it is because that's useful farmland, useful functional land, and the same thing is true of Ukraine for the most part. There's been another report of at least 2 drones exploding in the Pskov region of Russia. And an unknown drone attacked a pipeline there, according to Mikhail Veternikov, the governor of the region. He said today in the early morning, as a result of an explosion, the administrative task of the pipeline near village of Levidnov in the Nevelsk district was damaged. There were no casualties, which, in Russian speak could mean everyone is dead. And he later clarified that the building was attacked by 2 drones at once. This was reported on Baza 5:30 in the morning, and the pumping station of Transneft was attacked. The facades and glazing of the 3 administrative buildings were damaged. This is, the village is 500 kilometers inside Russia from the Ukrainian border. And it's like along closer to Belarus. After Belgorod and the sort of attacks inside the country, Is there buzz really about the, obviously I've seen, reports everywhere, applauding the Belgorod attack as just one of the most extraordinary military actions of the entire war by anybody, because they were able to just put Russia on the back foot so quickly and then bug out.
Yeah. Well, and Belgorod was devastating. Well, I say devastating. It was a very powerful blow to the psyche of the Russians. And as much as they protested, it was no big thing, and we repelled the Ukrainian-backed Russian partisans, and we're not worried about it. Yeah, except for the fact that we can see what is broadcast on Russian television, and clearly it was deeply disturbing.
Right. They did ultimately destroy a BTR-82A, I have a list here, armored personnel carrier, 100-millimeter anti-tank gun. Yeah, and 2 trucks.
Yeah, they captured some stuff.
Yep.
They blew up the FSB, which is the intelligence, the
station there? Wow.
Yep, the FSB, there was an FSB office that they blew up. They didn't get into Belgorod proper, so it might have been, some sort of local office. But yep, the Russian-backed, the Ukrainian-backed Russian anti-Putin forces that was in there. It has to be stressed. They made a point of making sure there was Russians that did this and not Ukrainians. And so they claim to have done that. They claim to have blown up an FSB office. They claim to have captured a bunch of armor, destroyed a bunch of armor. But it also just, it's a shock to the system when actually you have Ukrainians taking the war to Russia onto Russian territory.
Which seems like it could be part of, it could be the kind of thing that you would find in relation to the offensive, something that the counteroffensive that they could. This is a good lead-up ploy.
Again, right, and this goes along with the mentality that I say is what the Ukrainians are trying to do there is to make the Russians have to defend every inch of everything and spread their forces out because they never know where things are going to come. And I want to make one other quick point about that thrust into Russia towards Belgorod, where I think it's hysterical. And it's not a coincidence. I am 100% sure.
Okay, wait. Hold for a second. Hold that idea through the break. Yeah.
Oh, it's gonna be so good when we come back.
I built a tease in there. It's good because I want you to have room to say it. So we'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, mega worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. I know I'm only on one day a week. I get it. I'm gonna have to jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the House Sparks Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Sparks Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's going to be good.
The Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So I agree. Welcome back to the show. Don't forget, you can like and subscribe on YouTube, infotainmentwars.com. Infotainmentwars.com. We don't need the documents. We've got everything memorized.
We made it up.
We made it up. Because it's because we're defending against absolute lies. There's not even any work involved.
That's right.
Why bother to fight the truth to fight a lie when it's just garbage? Just point it out and move on. And of course, patreon.com/HalSparks. You can support the show and help keep us on the air and make sure keep Johnny and his Lenny and Larry cookies.
Yep.
Keep him. Yes, this is the only food he's got.
That's all I got.
Yes.
For the next couple minutes.
It's like that old story about this man who was arrested for stealing a crust of bread, and the judge said, "Why did you do it?" And he said, "I only like the crust."
Huh.
Phillip Ittner is still with us in Russia, and he was teasing us before the break about the effect of Belgorod. Cruel. And one of the things that the reasoning behind it, I believe, is that where you were going, Phil?
No, I was gonna make the analogy to 2014, and what I think is
Little green
really
man.
interesting the way the way the Ukrainians, and they're very good about this, and we have to understand the language that's being used between Ukraine and Russia right now, and one of the things that you have to pick up on and it's very nuanced, is the Ukrainians made sure that it was Russian nationals who made this incursion into Russia. And they mimicked almost exactly the language that the Russians used when they invaded eastern Ukraine and the Donbass back in 2014 after the Maidan events. Because the Russians said, oh no, it's this grassroots resistance to the oppression of Kiev. We don't know where all these militants in Donbass suddenly got their hands on a bunch of tanks and anti-aircraft weaponry and these high-end, like clearly Russian systems.
Right.
But what they did is they just gaslit everybody and just stood their ground and said, nope, they bought all that stuff on the open market, had nothing to do with us. We have no idea how that happened.
Good Lord.
It was a grassroots explosion in the east, by people who wanted to be closer to Russia than to Kiev. And today, now in 2023, with this incursion by Russian nationals towards Belgorod, driving around in Humvees and U.S. MRAP armored personnel carriers, and the Ukrainians have said almost word for word exactly what the Russians have said. Oh, they must have bought those Humvees and those MRAPs on the open market.
Right.
Knowing full well that the weapons have been flooding in here from NATO and the West.
Right.
Oh, no, they must have just, I don't know where those
we just
came
purchased
from.
them.
It's almost word for word. Yeah, word for word what they said in 2014, and it's perfect.
Right.
Because it's using Russia's own language and excuses that they used in 2014 against them in 2023. We all know that those Humvees and those MRAPs and those soldiers were armed by the Ukrainians, done with Ukrainian intelligence, done with Ukrainian support, and ultimately Western support,
and seized Russian vehicles. Right.
And seized, and they just stuck to like the Russians. Despite all, obvious evidence to the contrary, the Ukrainians just like, I don't know how they got those Humvees and MRAPs. I mean, they must have bought it on the open market. Almost exactly with the Russians in 2014. And it's genius trolling.
One of the secondary effects of it, though, because one of the points I saw made was that it didn't just serve as sort of a PR assault on Russia or as a scramble assault, that one of the things it served was it exposed the Russians' 3rd Motorized Infantry Force Division, which heretofore everybody didn't know where they were stationed or if they were already in the country. And this is how they discovered that they indeed were not, that they were still inside Russia. And they were part of the group that was, I suppose, either sent to defend Belgorod or were there and weren't able to do anything. But either way, it let the Ukrainians know precisely, gave them another head count of available Russian forces leading up to this the counteroffensive, which is incredibly useful in terms of what they know they have to prepare for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is the Ukrainians are showing the world that they're just better at this than the Russians are.
Right.
They're a lot smarter about how they use their military might. They're smarter in terms of how they use propaganda. They're smarter in terms of messaging, language, everything. They're just far more sophisticated at this than the Russians seem to be. And this is another example of it.
Yeah, and it apparently also the result of the Belgorod thing was there were a bunch of Russian settlements on the border, on the Russian side of the border, areas, small towns or whatever, that they have effectively evacuated ahead of this advance. At present, 7 villages on the Russian border are already without any kind of command structure, mayors, nothing of that. Everybody who's in charge of anything bugged out already. According to Andrei Yusov, the representative of the Main Intelligence Directorate, he was on New Countdown. He goes, for security reasons, he did not specify the details, but he said there are several settlements on the border from which the Russian power has actually departed. In principle, there's not a single power there now, meaning any kind of administrative function at all. Everybody just left. What effectively these fake city councils, these the mayors of these houses, they're just bugging everybody out. And at the same time that they are evacuating a bunch of people from Crimea, or that have, I guess, are self-evacuating. There was another fire on the bridge, and people couldn't tell if it was caused by. Everybody thought it was Ukrainians had done something, but I think it turned out that it was a car crash because people were driving to get out, so they weren't paying attention. So again, another one of these like self-inflicted wounds. In terms of, it was embarrassing for about 24 hours. Oh my God, they've hit the bridge again, and it turned out it was just a car crash because people were freaking out and trying to get out of Crimea. There are, there are very few options, I think, that Russia has going forward. Honestly, and we're going to take some questions from the chat room. We've got some already, and I think we can probably get one before we go to break.
Sure.
But they are running out of BS. They're like that.
Yeah. And the other thing is, before we get to questions, it's also, and it's a really important thing, is that, and it's not the first instance of it, but it's another indication that the Ukrainians are controlling the narrative. The Russians are having to respond to what the Ukrainians do, and they're really running things. The Ukrainians do stuff, and the Russians have to react.
Yeah,
and from a force that everybody thought was the superior force, the Russians should be the one dictating the way this war goes, not the Ukrainians. But it's just, it's been time and time again that the Ukrainians make the Russians dance to their tune, and that's, in a war, that's not good.
Yeah, so. And on that note, let's grab a question, Johnny. Who
sure,
do we
I've
first?
got a question here from Nacho Tube. Please ask Phil if Chicken Kiev is just called chicken in Ukraine.
Oh, ouch! No, Chicken Kiev is named. It's not really actually made in Kiev. There's a whole long story to it. But
we're not going to get into that's not real Chinese food conversation, are we?
Yeah, no, we're not going to go down that road about whether or not Kung Pao chicken was actually
right. Whether General Tsao ever existed, or whether he likes his food. He loved really bland food.
Chicken tikka masala is actually a British creation, not an Indian one.
General Tsao had a very delicate gastrointestinal system. He couldn't take spices at all. I think it's an ironic dish. And by the way, speaking of spicy Chinese receptions, I don't know. Hey, little ham in it. Li Hui, the Chinese ambassador who went to the EU, was basically going around to all these countries, and the word on the street is, and the Ukrainian, interestingly enough, the Ukrainian diplomat is pushing back on this, but everybody else, the Germans, the French, everybody else is saying this, that they basically, the Chinese were trying to get the Europeans to agree that the already seized territory is Russia's and just move on. And apparently everybody told them to go pound sand.
Yeah, well, that's why the Chinese so-called peace proposal is never going to take traction in Ukraine, because the 4 provinces that underwent a quote-unquote referendum, basically at the end of a bayonet,
we got to take
through this war. That shouldn't be Ukrainian, and the Chinese efforts are disingenuous.
Right. That seems like a preemptive Taiwan defense. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. More questions from the chat room at infotainmentwars.com. Like, subscribe, support the show. Subscribe today. Subscribe. Did I mention subscribe? You should subscribe. It's a good idea.
Attention. Stop what you're doing. Because we're coming back to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Oh my God!
They went a little crazy with it, and I appreciate it.
Now let's get back with Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Before we get to our next question from the chat room, one of the things I think we can all trace back to Russian interference and an attempted interference, not just in our elections, but in our society as a whole. In the same way that the TikTok algorithm is designed by the CCP, not Chinese engineers, not Chinese human beings who are trying to make a website and blah, blah, blah. The actual CCP designs it to undermine the functionality of Western societies. They want, the idea is bait, middle school girls into cutting groups and horrible stuff like that to try and create basically, these kind of ancillary dystopian moments in everyone's life so that everybody feels like they're on shaky ground all the time. And that's how you do it. That's how you destabilize. When you can't fight the system, your system's terrible comparatively, you undermine the social cohesion. Is that the thing? And the Russians, of course, setting up, pro-Hillary and anti-Hillary, pro-LGBT and anti-LGBT groups, and then telling both of them that there's a rally on the same day and that kind of stuff. We know this. And so the QAnon stuff was at the root of a lot of that stuff. A lot of that feed happened. And there's a big belief that Mike Flynn was one of the voices behind that, and his relation with Russia involved him dealing in that. Now, when Ron DeSantis officially announced, what popped up all over the QAnon things, which are still sort of semi-live, they still exist, and they end up, the message that they put out, they end up working their way up to the regular right-wing media sphere. There's literally a picture on one of the big accounts. I'm looking at it right now. It's a black and white picture of Ron DeSantis, and underneath it is from 18 U.S.C. 2381. Whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and or comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death. That literally, because Ron DeSantis is running for president.
Oh, it's treasonous.
It's against Donald Trump. They consider that an act of treason.
That's right there on the old Truth Social.
It's right there. It is not. None of this is surprising. I mean, like, they're Looney Tunes, right? But what little room they do have to actually sell this nonsense, where it still has a grip on stuff, is half the Trump voters. Yeah. Half of them. Half of the hardcore Trump voters that are still left out there, and my mom is FaceTiming me. That's fun. She just never knows when I'm on the air. Just what happens. We'll bring her on. She wanted to talk to Phil. I think she has a crush. Yeah, she's here
to let you know she just hit your car.
Yeah, she just wrecked my rental car. Yeah. Right. 100 miles away, 300 miles away, whatever it is. All right, so let's grab another question, if we can, from the chat room. I text my mother and let her know everything's okay.
Got a question from Connie Kelly. Is the Wagner Group commander dissing the Russians who took over in Bakhmut being reported in Ukraine?
Sure. Yeah. No, they're very well aware of Prigozhin's stuff, his pronouncements. So Ukrainians are keeping an eye. I mean, there's no love lost for Prigozhin. It's a lot of people are very. There's a lot of questions about why he's being allowed to still say what he is. If he was, if he was a normal Russian citizen, by now he'd be in jail. So a lot of weird stuff, and a lot of the Ukrainians
they pulled out too. Didn't the Wagner Group pulled out of Bakhmut? They basically this declaring victory thing and then beaten feet had a lot to do with, and supposedly now it's going to be Russian troops that will roll in and hold the place. Because that was the agreement, right? But there's nothing to hold because they basically flattened the area. And B, the soldiers that they send in are these conscript, these like saps that get snatched off the street or former prisoners or whatever. None of them are trained. He even stood. I'm sure you saw this, Phil. That video of him standing there with two Russian fighters, where it was like this guy in his 60s and then this like younger chubby guy who was right next to him, and he's like putting his arms around him, going, "These are the Russian soldiers that are going to fight this war from now on." Obviously, making fun of their age and lack of physical fitness. Obviously mocking them, like whether they knew it to their face or even could have a say in it, whether they're aware and they're like, oh my God, this guy's going to get it. They're going to take a sledgehammer to our head right after. That was stunning. Like, don't worry about it. Wagner's out, but these guys have got your back.
Yeah, it's very weird. I don't know why Prigozhin is being allowed to say what he is saying. Some speculation he's got some dirt on Putin. Some suspicion that Putin is actually using him to, put pressure on other sections of the military.
Right.
But it's very, very odd that he hasn't faced more serious repercussions.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let's grab another question because we got a few minutes before this break.
Right on. Next question is from Elizabeth. They're curious about Putler, which kind of makes me laugh, or Putler, leaning on Belarus while Z courts Biden. What are Philip's thoughts on that?
Well, leaning on Lukashenko and Belarus
while Z, the China... She, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, she courts Biden.
Yeah.
Look, it's not lost on a lot of people the fact that there's an entire international coalition that's been arrayed against Russia, and the only country that Russia can turn to is this little tin-pot dictatorship called Belarus. The Chinese are certainly not helping them out the way they had hoped.
Right.
The Russians. But if your only ally in essence is Belarus, you're not doing that right on. There was pressure, certainly brought to bear this week on the Belarusians because they've signed this agreement to allow Russian nukes to be positioned on their territory. That probably wasn't something that they would have, agreed to without a little bit, more than just a little bit of pressure. It doesn't change anything significantly,
right?
But the fact that their only ally is Lukashenko, I think speaks volumes.
Cool. Yeah, we've got 5 minutes. Can we burn through? And I just want to make sure we get.
So. Yeah, a real quick one. Does Philip know John Sweeney, the British war journalist?
Sure do. Yeah, John and I collaborate on a lot of different stuff. So John's a good guy. He's a little eccentric, but who isn't?
In watching, and I don't know quite what the reference was from the question beforehand about she courting Biden in particular, because we've had, our ambassadors are going to talk because Apple, one of the world's biggest company, and America's probably biggest, financial company next to Amazon, perhaps, is basically in the process of extracting themselves from China, doing deleveraging themselves, as it were, over time, because you can't do that in one fell swoop, or you just shut down all your production entirely. And they should have started.
The suicide nets are full of people,
right? That's the even worse than the Foxconn stories about that stuff happening early on, where we found out later that, by the way, those folks that they talk about, it wasn't even about them not being paid a proper wage or the kind of conversation about their it's so stressful or whatever, is that they were literally using slave labor from Xinjiang and lying about it. The Chinese were rounding up people and bringing them down there and forcing them to work. And those people don't even get the paycheck or the education or the promises that come after it at all. So that's how they keep the labor costs low, was that they were, because the people who really take the job, who need it, those folks wouldn't take, less than they were worth. So they pad out the numbers of people there with slave labor. Hence the shutting down of that particular factory, and then the Foxconn campus, the Taiwanese started pulling out of there and moving it to Indonesia and all this other stuff. So the United States is doing this kind of like Indiana Jones bag of sand to gold statue moment, where it's trying to get out without the darts going off, and it's very difficult. And most of what are talking, the back and forth this week was, Biden, I guess it was, Blinken and them back and forth, saying something along the lines that Biden was saying, we're not decoupling, we're de-risking and deleveraging from China, which is the exact same thing. Since it's all risk.
Yeah. And
it's financially untenable to build a factory. No one's starting a new factory that has any brains at all in China right now. Even Elon Musk has, he had just started his gigafactory, and that kind of, that was his last hurrah inside there. And they're throwing all kinds of support his way. They're also stealing Tesla tech like crazy, which is hilarious at the same time. I don't know how he didn't see that coming. Maybe he's not so much a genius after all. But the idea that she is courting Biden right now at all is nowhere near the reality of what's going on. And they're not even bothering to court the EU at the same time, or try to break, between us and them, or try to drive a wedge, because none of it is playing out that way. So I'm not worried that anything they say about Ukraine is going to become a factor, just at all. Do we have another question? Because we got like 2 minutes before this next break.
All right. Next question from Berkeley Dowd. Why did Putin sacrifice 100,000 troops in Bakhmut just to declare victory by taking a city with little or no strategic significance?
I mean, it's a good question. I think once they started getting so deeply entrenched in Bakhmut, it became a symbolic victory, and neither side wanted to give it up. But you're right; it's not strategically or tactically that important. And I don't know how much of it was Putin. I mean, regular forces were in there, but it was in a lot of the Wagner guys, many of whom were just gathered out of prisons that were sent into the meat grinding there. So it wasn't really as much the Russian military as this private military group led by Prigozhin that bore the brunt of a lot of the casualties. But I don't know why when they started to try and take that move, but they just got so entrenched in it that it became this kind of symbolic victory, but it ultimately was a Pyrrhic victory for the Russians. And probably one that they're not going to hold to very long.
He was a little garbled on the last. Can you say that part again? You were a little fuzzy.
Well, I don't think it was a Pyrrhic victory for Russia, and I don't think they're going to hold on to it regardless. So we'll see what happens exactly.
Gotcha.
We haven't heard the last.
Cool. Well, let's take a break. Our final break of the show, and man, it zipped by. As you know, that's what happens when we hang out together. That's when we're all here. It's a boo. We got one more break. And chat room, love you guys. Thank you guys for the support. We're not seeing super chats and that kind of stuff right now, I just want you to know we appreciate it. I'm just sending you love. Thank you so much for your support. We'll be back right after this.
I am happy, you are happy, let us be happy together, whether the weather is cloudy or sunny. I will always be your funny honey bunny. I am lucky, you are lucky, let us get lucky together, whether the weather is cloudy or breezy. I'll be there to say, hey, come on, let's take it easy. 'Cause isn't it nice to have the friends that you do? And isn't it nice that the sky is so blue? And isn't it nice to say I love you, chugga chugga choo choo, woo woo. I am smiling, you are smiling, let us smile together, whether the weather is cloudy or stormy. I will still be there in the morning, I'll be right by your side in the morning. I'll make you breakfast in the morning, I hope that you like cereal.
Yay! Welcome back to the show. And of course, thank you, Phillip Ittner. That in and of itself, that you're with us and you're safe and all that is a happy ending in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And my my primary happy ending is that I'm in Chicago.
Wow.
Pretty great. Yeah. And we're it's a lovely.
Go to Little Kiev.
Yeah, we're gonna go to Little Kiev and have lunch.
Wish you were here.
Yeah.
It'd be fun.
Yeah. So there's a lot to cover in this or whatever. Is there an upside in as far as life in Kiev? I know that they just opened. I want to say they fixed a train line in the northern part near Kiev or something along those lines, and they've been there's a lot of things coming back online, that were hit early in the war last year that have finally been repaired, and if they aren't hit again, will be normal functioning parts of the Ukrainian society, and going forward.
I mean, look, they released a photograph just this week of Bucha. And how already Bucha has been rebuilt and all, you wouldn't even recognize it. Right. So, the Ukrainians are not wasting any time in fixing things that have been destroyed in this war because, they're very optimistic that they're going to win the war. So they're not going to wait until there's a peace deal for them to start rebuilding their country because they know they're going to win. And they want to have a regular country when whatever peace accord is drawn up and signed. they'll be ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is, I don't know how if the Russians hit these cities again. It's a curious aspect of this. It's sort of like the tactical nuke issue. Is if they go over that line again, it makes it even more abundantly clear. It makes it harder for the Chinese to back them. It makes it harder for even anybody who's mildly on the fence in the EU to back them. Because the idea, like, every time you build up your city, we're going to destroy it with, you put civilians back there, we're going to attack it again. That it does not help their cause that them's the Nazis over there.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
That's right. And Johnny, I don't know if you have a happy ending other than you're just glad to see me.
I'm just so glad to see you in Summer.
Yes. That's I think we've got, we can get a couple more questions in before the end of the show, right?
Sure.
So I got a question from Greg Edmond. Is the nuclear complex at Zaporizhzhia completely under Ukraine control?
It's a good question, because,
No.
Yeah.
No, it's still very much Russian-held territory. It's contested. The Zaporizhzhia front is a very active front, but right now the plant itself is under Russian control, but it is being operated by Ukrainian nuclear scientists because they know the equipment. So,
right, with a gun to their head, basically.
Right, basically. Well, and also just knowing that it's in everybody's best interest that the place keeps running steadily. So we have actually heard occasionally from these Ukrainian scientists or engineers or what have you that are at Zaporizhzhia, and the message that keeps coming out from there is, we don't trust the Russians to operate this place properly, so we'll stay here and do it, which is a very noble thing for the Ukrainians to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. So I've got a question from Can't Stop Lying. Does Philip think Ukraine getting F-16s will cause any hesitancy from Russia once Ukrainians are trained on how to use them?
I don't know how significant it'll be. Of course, it'll be taken into consideration. I mean, the F-16 is a better fighter than pretty much anything that the Russians, with a couple of exceptions, that they can put in the air. So I don't think it's going to be like a massive thing for the Russians to be like, oh goodness, now we have to completely restructure our air power doctrine. But I'm sure that they will take it into consideration because the F-16 is a really good piece of kit.
Cool. Yeah.
I've got another question from Jordan Mills. This was a super chat. Has Phil heard anything about the Belarusian dictator being treated for poisoning in Moscow, and that the Belarus opposition party is planning elections to take back control?
There's been a rumor that actually something happened in Moscow and he was poisoned or something happened. I don't know how much truth there is to that. There is clearly something up with Lukashenko. He is not healthy.
Yeah.
Something is going on with him, and we don't know what it is.
Healthy.
And it could. He looks awful. He's not being very public forward these days. Something's up with him. Now, it could be some sort of illness. It could be some sort of ailment.
Right.
But it could also just be he knows he's in trouble.
Yeah.
He knows he's deeply
stress.
His future is tied intrinsically to Putin.
Right.
And he knows things are not going well.
Yeah.
So it may just be the realization that his, what is it now, 30 plus years in power, almost 40 years in power, is probably going to come to a close, and it's not going to be a very good legacy.
Right.
But there's something wrong with Lukashenko.
Yeah, no doubt.
I don't know if the Russians would do it. Also, one last thing on that. I don't know if the Russians would do it because Lukashenko is a very useful tool for them, and they don't have anybody
it's not like they have somebody
him
waiting in the wings to replace him with that will be
His son
better
is not ready.
or more palatable than the Belarusians. Right.
No. And as far as and then one other quick little note, as far as the opposition is concerned, Ken Sutherland is absolutely right. There is a very powerful and ready opposition to step in when Lukashenko goes, because he's a terrible, terrible dictator.
All the more reason not to get rid of him for them, because that anybody that gives them a wedge point to kind of get the crowbar in and start moving it.
The opposition is alive and well, and Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, the wife of the opposition leader who's in jail, is an amazing woman and has represented her country very well. And in a lot of ways, the European powers see her as the legitimate government of Belarus, only in exile. Right. I don't know as I agree with them, but it does show that the Western world is standing behind the true Belarusian people, and the fact that that Lukashenko is not in power legitimately.
Right. That's right. There's. Do we have more? Or are we
sure,
good?
I've got a couple more, but what did you have?
Yeah, no, I would. Well, I would get into sort of like the happy ending part of it. Now, we try not to be too Schadenfreude about the good news. I like my good news, pure and simple. But there's been so much of that kind of like certain awful people who have
my favorite REM song.
Certain awful people getting theirs.
Yeah.
Right. That there's been finally, there's been a group of these folks that are going to see the inside of a courtroom, and in some cases seeing the inside of a jail cell. Yep. Not the least of which is that Trump has reasons to sweat and scream on Truth Social these days. But the people who were arrested for seditious conspiracy around the Capitol attack, again, that hopefully over time, makes the bait that Russia tries to drop, or that the CCP or Saudis try to drop into our social media world, harder to take. It makes it a little like it might put a little hitch in their get along, slow their roll a little bit, as it were. Hopefully. That said, we shall see what we shall see. By the way, Phillip Ittner, for those of you that are newly introduced to him, has a vlog on YouTube. Just look him up on there, Phillip, 1L, Ittner with 2 T's. And you just posted the one with your interview with Malcolm Nance? And
posted the thing with Malcolm. There'll be another interview that I'm going to post on Monday. Okay. I'm starting to think that I might schedule things, posting every week, a Monday interview, and then a Friday vlog, and have that as a regular schedule.
That's smart. Yeah. Well, things really kick off when you get a regular schedule on the YouTubes, according to all those how to be like Mr. Beast videos that I watch. And Johnny Million's live on Twitch, twitch.tv/it's Johnny Million.
And YouTube.
And YouTube, right.
Yeah.
Is it the same name on there?
Yeah.
It's Johnny Million. Excellent. And then, of course, infotainmentwars.com and fwank.com if you want to go to Twitch. Subscribe if you have Amazon Prime. Yes. If you have Amazon Prime, it doesn't cost you a dime. And patreon.com/HalSparks helps support the entire show. I'm just gonna enjoy the fact. My ultimate happy ending is that we are here in the studio today, together with good friends. And I'm sorry that we couldn't pipe Phil in visually this time around, but it probably gives him a break from having to do his hair. So that's that.
Phil is finally pants free.
Is he?
Yeah.
What do you mean finally?
Yeah.
You do realize there's a reason he never gets up, while he's talking to us.
Don't stand up, Phil.
Yeah, he doesn't want to pull it. He doesn't want a tube in it. He doesn't want to have a Jeffrey Toobin moment. But we are going to. I'm planning on doing and I don't know when you're stateside again, or if you have any plans to do that, Phil. But I'm going to plan on doing an in-town Chicago, live, do the show out in the world thing at some point this fall. And if Phil's around, we will drag him down there.
Absolutely.
I insist.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's right.
Sure. Well, I got my place in Michigan, so that's fine. It's only about a 6-hour drive.
Only 6 hours.
I've done it. Yeah. I've done it.
Well,
yeah, I've
6 hours is nothing.
That's right. Yeah. These days, especially considering you could drive 2 hours and you're in an area that's being currently bombed. Nice greenery to drive through, and a couple of toll booths are no big deal after you've been through that. So, Phil, thank you for being with us.
Yay.
Appreciate it. Thanks to everybody here in Chicago for being so hospitable to my craziness.
They're so
and,
kind here.
Yep, it is lovely. And love you, Johnny Million. We'll see you later today.
Good old Chicago.
Yes, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.